open science community. And this is odd telling stories because I come from a quantitative background, but those of the qualitative researchers in the room will appreciate this, hopefully. And it's very African to tell stories about where we come from. So let's get started. Right, so once upon a time, there was a little girl called Angelique. And from a very young age, I was very interested in how things work. I recall a Christmas when I was probably 5 or 6 years old when, and I'm going to give my age away now, I wanted a radio cassette player. I really enjoyed music because it's a very much in my family and in our culture, but I wondered what it looked like inside. How did this mechanism work? You put the tape in and it turned, and I had no idea what it looked like. So I ended up getting a tape recorder for Christmas when I put some of my pocket money together, and I took the cassette player apart and I put it back again. And now I'm grown up and I take PC parts apart and I put them back together like grown-up Legos. And some grown-ups in my family would tell me it's not typical of a girl to do stuff like that. Why does a girl play with a doll and dress dolls and cooking and stuff? And I never understood why girls couldn't take apart radio cassette players or build with Legos or build cars in sand. And I must say that the questions I asked as a 5 to 6 year old was different. I didn't understand why people said stuff like that. And you can say that I've been pushing the boundaries from a very young age. So that's me and my little sister in there, maybe just to share a little picture of what I looked like when I was younger. Moving onwards and fast forwarding a couple of years, right? I still had an interest in how things worked. And I was very interested in psychology, how the mind works. And now this is now making it more complex because psychology is very abstract. And I specialize in educational psychology, but more so in the programming and methodological aspects thereof. And I had a taste to statistical and programming courses in our social science and humanities courses. In my PhD, I looked at how the systems theory work and resilience and the more human and the social science aspect. And I looked at an ecology and how it contributes to a youth's resilience. But how does it work? And I wanted to quantitatively put this out. And after 6 months of battling really hard, you can see the model I put up there. I did it in latent variable modeling, so a more multi-regressional type of model where everything interacts with everything. But coming to this part here, there's another backstory to it. How did I get to actually model this there and do the quantitative work? I had very supportive research focus area at the Northwest University in South Africa. The focus area's name is called Hortensia. You can Google them. They are multidisciplinary. All the social sciences, humanities, and they're also involved in economics as well, for those of you in the room who are involved with that. They provided me with funding because in South Africa at that time, this is now back in 2010, around, let's say about 12 years ago, quantitative training for social scientists was unheard of. I didn't in my curriculum have any workshops other than what was offered at our workshop, at our focus area. And I really wanted to do more technical stuff. I wanted to do the programming myself. I wanted to do the statistics. I want to know how this works at the end, but it's expensive. And we need to acknowledge that these resources and opportunities are not accessible for all. So we need to ask the questions, how equitable, inclusive, and accessible are we making these events for young researchers? Maybe some of you in the room can agree with me. Are we making it accessible to everyone? And then as a postdoc, I found the Northwest University's e-research initiative. And I got invited to attend the initial meetings, and I met a strong supporter of open science and open access for all, Anelda van der Walt. Maybe some of you have seen her at the Carpentries meetups. I recognize a bunch of your names here. And she drew me in and she taught me about open science. And she shared resources with me and the rest of the community at the Northwest University. And one of those opportunities was for me to travel to China, where I met a bunch of great South African open scientists as well. And I attended the international training workshop for developing countries on big data for science. And I had the opportunity to visit the Space Center in Beijing as well. And we covered interdisciplinary applications of open research data, data-intensive research, data management policies, cloud computing, visualization, and more when it comes to open science. And this opportunity opened a door to another world for me. And this world was the Carpentries. You might not see on your screen there, and I'm not exactly sure where I am on this photo, but we were a bunch of instructors in Cape Town who did instructor training, sponsored by the Carpentries back in 2017. And I can now teach foundational coding and data analytics skills workshops. Bring these skills to Africa, make it more accessible, make it more applicable to the African context. And in a nutshell, that is my short, but it feels like a 12-year journey to where I am right now. And now I have the opportunity to work for a not-for-profit, very open and passionate about open science. So in 2019, I got employed as the regional consultant for Southern Africa at the Carpentries. And moving on, 2021, my role transitioned into not only supporting Southern Africa, but as an African capacity development manager as well. And a lot of you in the room know that it's great that I can now support the whole continent. Now you might ask me, Angelique, I have no idea what the Carpentries are and what do you do? So I'm quickly going to go over that. We're a not-for-profit project made up of global volunteer community of learners. So those attending workshops, lesson developers, those developing these lessons. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what these lessons entail in a bit. Trainers, training instructors, etc., etc. We teach foundational coding and data science skills to researchers worldwide. So we focus more on open source software, R, Python, spreadsheet, OpenRefine, Git, Shell, Bash. If you know of an open source tool and it's not listed here, later I'm going to share my contact details, share it to us. We want to share it with the world. We build a community and local capacity for teaching and learning globally. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this, but I wanted to give you just an overview of a brief history of the Carpentries. So we have the software Carpentries, data Carpentries, and the library Carpentries. Software is about, I want to manipulate a software program to work for me as a researcher, but also open source based. Data Carpentry, I have a data set I want to analyze. How can I use an open source tool to analyze it? And library Carpentry is the introduction to librarians and information scientists who want to then, as maybe from a support and capacity building perspective, teach software and data science to other researchers and postgraduate students, postdocs, etc., etc. So now I'm here speaking to you today. And I want to bring in the reality that the global South is facing. Not only Africa, I think we can really categorize it over the whole global South. So zooming in Africa, the challenges in teaching and learning programming in Africa, we have a historical disadvantage to quality education. There's a challenge to equip scholars with necessary skills and knowledge due to the digital divide, educational inequalities, cultural differences in programming, and gender exclusion. Now, just to highlight one fact, in sub-Saharan Africa, we have the lowest literacy rate globally, with more than 80% of young people not achieving minimum proficiency in mathematics and related subjects. And this, for someone who's very passionate about open science and bringing resources to Africa by Africans, this is concerning. We have a lack of ICT infrastructure in the most of the continent, lack of access at the cost of internet, unreliability with regards to electricity generation in South Africa. I'm not sure in the rest of the continent we have load shedding. Our energy provider sometimes have issues to provide electricity, and that does make hosting online workshops in COVID very, very difficult. We have a lot of insecurity when it comes to internet security. And to summarize, many Africans are not learning the skills needed for research-related activities in the 21st century. So you're going to say, okay, Angelique, so what now? We need individuals like you in the room today, those who are passionate about a career in open science and sharing your knowledge and sharing your experience with communities. We need you who are, and I see a bunch of carpentries instructors in the room. I'm not going to call you by name, but we host workshops. We train and build capacity in researchers and young people to break that digital divide, to break that gender exclusion. And you're going to ask me, so how can I get involved? You can ask questions. I think when I was a very young girl, I always asked why, and it irritated my mother and father and my family endlessly. But I'm glad I asked the questions. I'm glad I asked, why does this work this way? Why do I have to play with Barbies? I liked playing with dolls, but I also liked building sandcastles in the sand. I liked taking apart radio cassette players, but I like dancing as well, and I like ballet. And it's okay if we want to do that. So I want to say, push your boundaries. Ask the difficult questions. Ask why can't we offer this for free, a workshop perhaps? How can we offer it for minimal fees so that we can get maximum people in a workshop? Join a community call. I'm going to be chatting about different organizations you can join in a bit, but join the calls. Ask the questions, join a study group. If you want to learn more about R, about Python or Shell, there are many open science organizations that you can, for free, join calls, join study groups, learn more. So when you go back to wherever you are based, and when you are teaching your cohorts or you are hosting your workshops, that we can spread the knowledge, because I think that is the thing we can do. We can spread the knowledge. Attend a workshop or two. There are plenty of carpentries workshops that if you go in the workshop, you can attend for free. Some of them, they can provide mobile data for access as well to make it more inclusive. Apply for funding to attend a conference. Run your own events. I'm going to be chatting about a call that will be coming out very soon for funding in the next couple of slides. So just keep watching there. And the Carpentries are hosting a virtual event in August, the 1st to the 12th. It's called Carpentry Con at Home. And you can, I will share these slides for you to circulate, Caleb, as well, if anyone wants these links. I just need to remove the pictures of my sister. I don't think she's going to appreciate it if I spread that out. And share your resources and opportunities in a local community. If you see, oh, here's a funding opportunity, share it with individuals. Grow the community, your little community or your up and coming community or on bigger communities. Share, how can we attend conferences for free? How can we get access to mobile data? How can we make sure that people get the resources needed to break the digital divide? So as promised, other organizations that are passionate about community capacity building, and there are many more, but these are what the organizations I work with on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And the first is OpenCider. So OpenCider is for open computational inclusion and digital equity resources. They're particularly interested in what happens when we have low bandwidth. How do we teach workshops then? How do we access resources? I know Sarah was one of the presenters during the BOSS conference, so she probably have spoken much more, but due to the limitations of time, I'm not going to get too into this. The next is in Kenya, specifically the Bioinformatics Hub of Kenya initiative. I know they run a lot of workshops. They're supporters of this event and organizers of this event, so they're very much involved in bridging the gap. And again, this is the digital divide gap I spoke about a bit earlier. They want to bridge this gap between opportunities, capacity building, etc. So join their calls, join up on their mailing list. This is how you can get involved. The Research Data Alliance in Ethiopia, they're very much interested in integrating research communities, specifically in remote areas in Ethiopia and neighboring countries. They have calls, they run workshops in Ethiopia. If you have colleagues or you are based in Ethiopia, please reach out to me and I can connect you, because I think this is a great opportunity. It's an up and coming open science community and they need our support. the women in Wakran in Nigeria, they really want to break the inequality among females. And one project that is very amazing for me, they took Raspberry Pis and uploaded Python and taught, I think it's up to 90 ladies in Nigeria how to program in Python in low bandwidth, low resource communities. So everyone got a Raspberry Pi and they could learn how to program, got together, they make a local LAN, and that was amazing as well. Escalate in South Africa. These are workshops that are geared towards an inclusive and active South African community of practice in digital humanities and computational social science. So if this, they have a Twitter page, they're also on Slack. They are aimed at more advanced building of capacity. So if you feel you have a, let's say, a foundational basis on coding and data analytics, Escalate is right up your alley. They're definitely going to be there to grow your community, to help you build your capacity, so you can bring this information home to wherever you are based. H3A Bionet Africa is a Pan-African bioinformatics network for the Human Heredity and Health in Africa Consortium, but they not based, they, I think, have a node in South Africa, but they boast over the whole continent. I know there's a bunch of you in the room today who are somehow affiliated with them. They run bunches of capacity building workshops. Get involved with them, follow them on Twitter. They share a bunch of funding opportunities, workshops you can attend, different resources, articles about what's going on, specifically now in COVID times. Interesting if you want to follow that news. So the Code for Science and Society Event Fund is a global event fund that you can apply to host similar activities like this BOSS conference. They have, I think, 3 or 4 funding calls a year. You can apply for money to support you running your event. The event can be spread across the whole year. We at the Carpentries in Africa received a grant from them to host Carpentry Connect South Africa last year, and hopefully we'll receive funding next year if we are successful, obviously, to host a Carpentry Connect South Africa 2023. And the funding, and I want to say what a difference it made. We had individuals from all over Africa. We had the capacity to provide mobile data for those in Africa, not just in South Africa, to attend the event, to attend instructor training events, to attend workshops. And this grew the Carpentries community. And I really want to encourage you to apply for funding here. They also have many skill up events, how to run your event, how to plan a budget, for instance, how to make it more inclusive, how to make it more accessible. So they do try and help us create opportunities to bring the knowledge we have for the world. And I'm particularly, well, I wouldn't say, I'm going to be very biased. My interest lies in Africa because I'm an African. And so I want us to bring these events to Africa and grow the open science community. Now I'm almost, I think this is my second to last slide, but you're going to ask Lucas, Angelique, what possible careers is in an open science community? And there's a couple I want to chat about, not just at the Carpentries, but what I have found in other open science communities. Well, community development, my role is, that's primarily what I do. I build communities, I build capacity, I try and be a mediator between getting trained to become an instructor, attending a workshop, as well as new community members. Curriculum development, the Carpentries is very involved, as I mentioned, the data carpentry, software carpentry, and library carpentries, where various curriculums, so lessons, if you want to call that, all under the Creative Commons license, so free to use. So please have a look, go to our website, carpentries.org, and see how you can maybe use those lessons for free where you are. You can work through them asynchronously, you can attend a workshop, but we have individuals working on making sure these curriculums and lessons are up to date, are correct with open science technology out there. We're teaching the most relevant ones possible. We have an infrastructure technologist, software development and engineering, I think that's very, clear from what we do, why we would need that. We need individuals to make sure our infrastructure is up to date, make sure that we have the best technologists and software engineering, communications. How do we communicate with our community? Fundraising, very important role in open science communities. Where to get money to give opportunities for low cost or free if possible. Administration, every role has a bit of administration, right? Finance, how do we run our budget? How do we get more out of our dollar or out of our rand, as we say in South Africa? Research, a lot of research is going into open science. A lot of research, specifically journals, are saying we want research particularly done with open science infrastructure. Research software engineering, there's a great movement in Africa now. If you haven't heard about that, I can connect you with different people on the continent and abroad who will be more than happy to support you. And equity, inclusion, and access. The Carpentries had a landmark hire. We hired an accessibility manager who's going to make sure our lessons are more accessible, not just for individuals who are deaf, hard of hearing, but make it accessible to different cultures and context as well. So if you would like to hear more or get in contact with me, please feel free to pop me an email, angelique@carpentry.org, follow me on Twitter, Angelique PhD, or visit us at www.carpentries.org. And in a nutshell, that is my career in open science, the pathway I followed. And maybe, Caleb, do we have time for some questions? I don't know.
Yeah, we may have 3 or so minutes for questions. And thank you really for the amazing presentation and getting to see the journey that you've gone through, especially from your career to where you are right now. So you can ask questions via chat if you can, and you can also post them on the Academy document. I'm curious, Angelique, how you were able to transition from research to nonprofit, and how were you able to marry all your interests in your current positions?
That's great. Let me just, apologies. I don't know if you're hearing the feedback. Someone's working in their garden. I work from home permanently. So we're a virtual community working from home. So if it gets too much, please just let me know. I can close the door. Let me just quickly close it here. Apologies, everyone. There we go. That should be a bit better. Righto. So I was in a very fortunate position that as a PhD student and a postdoc, so already embedded in academia, to get involved in an open science community as a volunteer. So I was a carpentries instructor. I could teach and I grew my career there. I had a bunch of resources that I could teach and educate myself in. So when the regional consultant of Southern Africa position was advertised, I could, already have that background in open science. So I had a dual career at a stage, if that makes sense, Caleb. So I could have the open science community, my volunteering I did to teach at workshops, attend study groups, and when the right position came up, I could apply for that. So that's why I said, ask the right questions, get involved, hop on the community calls where you can. And when funding comes available and these positions open up, you can apply for them. Right.
Thank you, Angelique.
Thank you so much. I just want to say George's question. George, I have a link for the slides. Let me just, I'll share it in the chat, and maybe if the organizers can just add them into the, how can I say,
the Academy document.
File. There we go. It might take me about 10 minutes just to clean it up a little bit, but that will be the link you'll find it on.
Thank you so much for your presentation. That was really amazing, and for the response to the questions. So if you still have any questions, you can also just ask via chat. We will move on to the next presentation. I think Bibiana is already here with us. So Bibiana, if you can you can start sharing your screen as I get to introduce you. So
okay.
Yeah, thank you. So Bibiana Iraqi has wide experience in science communication that spans about 10 years. She has a Master's of Arts in Journalism from University of Wales and a BSc in Biotechnology from Cardiff University. She serves as a program officer at ISA, Free Center, where she handles various communications related duties. Key among them leading the development and implementation of communication strategies for major projects in the biosciences landscape in Africa. So she has been actively involved in strengthening capacity for effective science communication and advocacy across Africa, and has trained over 1,000 African scientists and researchers on how to communicate to non-technical audience. Our passion and dedication has contributed significantly towards the creation of an enabling environment for biotechnology development in the region. So Bibiana is passionate about science communication, which she believes is key to transforming Africa's wealth of research knowledge into tangible solutions for development. And I think this transitions really well from the current presentation. So welcome, Bibiana.
Thank you so much, Caleb, for that introduction, and I'm happy to be here with you all. As just quickly going to my slides, because when I was asked to come and speak to you all, I thought, okay, what do I say to this group? And I thought I really want to just leave you with some tips on how we can communicate with the non-technical audience, because I know if there's one thing scientists are very good at, is that you're very good at talking amongst yourselves, are good at talking to people, to your fellow scientists. So as you've heard, I currently work at ISA. ISA stands for the International Service for the Acquisition of Agri-Biotech Applications. And we do quite a number of things, but mainly just trying to translate knowledge and sharing knowledge on biosciences and biosafety through strategic communications and outreach for informed policy and choice. So getting right into the presentation, I want to engage you a bit and really ask you how you think you would complete this sentence. What do you think is the greatest problem with communication? Anybody can unmute the mic. You can type it in the chat, but I'd love for this to be engaging. We're trying to get used to this Zoom live. Ideally, you want to do this physically, but if somebody can just type what they think the answer to that is, or unmute and speak up, I'd appreciate that. There's no right and wrong answer. The greatest challenge with communication is, I'll prod on until deep understanding of concept, audiences. Thank you. Miscommunication. Thank you for that indulgence. There's a pretty famous quote by George Bernard Shaw, who's an Irish playwright. And he says the greatest problem with communication is the illusion that it has been accomplished. And that quote speaks for itself. And we see a lot of this in science when scientists are speaking to non-technical audiences. And from our experience, we've seen, even engaging with policymakers, a scientist is called up to present and they ask us, what is this person really saying? So, that's, I think, the greatest challenge with communication. And it becomes, sorry, my slides are not moving. That happens because in a lot of times when you're communicating or engaging with your non-technical audience, your message might be misconstrued. So you could be looking at the same message or sharing the same message, but it has a completely different meaning to your audience. So really, really, really confusing in a lot of cases. And this gets more complicated in our current world, where we've seen that there's a drop of trust in public institutions, in academia, in science. Everybody now almost thinks that they're an expert and that they can engage in these conversations. We've seen that, especially with the COVID and the growth of citizen journalism because of the rise in digital media. We have Karen on Facebook, who's now become the expert. And this is, has really changed from time in memorial in the 80s, for instance, where the leading scientists were recognized and seen as the experts. But today, anybody wants to come and even challenge the experts on social media. And of course, because of this rise in social media and digital media consumption, we've seen a drop in mainstream media consumption. And the reason this is a problem is because in as much as the media didn't get it right in the past, at least there was some checks and balances, and that at least helps to minimize how misinformation would spread. But today anything goes. And then we've also seen a growth of trust in celebrities. And these are the people who are being listened to and recognized on even technical issues. And unfortunately, again, because there's also been a drop in funding for science and science communication, and we've seen a lot of growth in anti-science behavior. So for us who've worked in the biotech space for a long time, this we saw and we dealt with for a very long time. And a lot of people in other cadres of science didn't see or appreciate this as much as we did. But I think the COVID situation has really helped people to see, the challenges and, with dealing with anti-science behavior. And then when we look at research to policy interface, because ideally, and we like to say, science that stays in publications is really just an academic exercise. We want to be able to see science translating and informing either policy or choice. But, there's a really weak research and policy interface because, as you know, scientists and policymakers are working at very different paces. So the scientist is tackling a problem over very many years, yet this decision maker has to make a decision every single day. And so it becomes very difficult to bring these two people together. And we see a lot of science and evidence not informing policy as much as we'd like to see. And that's why when we say that effective communication is very, very, very important. And if you feel I'm going fast, kindly just drop me a message in the chat. I tend to sometimes speak really fast. So if you feel like I'm moving too fast for you, kindly just let me know. And so like I was saying, we think then, or we feel that effective science communication is therefore very, very important because it helps, it's key to acceptance and adoption of technological and, bioscience innovations in science in generally. It helps to clarify myths and misinformation. And it helps you as a researcher to give meaning of your work in the eyes of stakeholders. So people now want to know what scientists are doing with our funds, with the money that we're giving to them. But ideally, in the past, what we've seen scientists are very good at is sharing information. I've done my research, I've published, and we've thought that is communication in the past, but that really is just information sharing. And we want to get people to understand and value the need to communicate. And science communication is about putting science into use by helping your stakeholders understand your results and make informed science-based decisions. And the only way you can do that is when it is two-way, understanding part of what the public wants and then responding to them with your solutions. Again, just continuing on the communication challenge, and what we've seen is in our African context, it's been very difficult to communicate about some of these issues because of the diverse cultures that we have. And then we have people that have varied needs, again, mixed opinions, and it becomes worse in our world today, like I mentioned earlier, where these opinions can travel so fast. Because of the digital media, we have clustered socioeconomic strata, education. Some people are not able to access this information. So it becomes very, very difficult and challenging to communicate our science. And then also very importantly, because of this, we need to understand very early on that context is king when we are communicating. Context will determine how your messages as a researcher are received. And so this again is a very interesting illustration that I came across that I found really speaks to what I'm trying to say right now. So there's this guy asking, what's your opinion about food shortage in the rest of the world? And to the Arab, they ask, what is opinion? What does opinion mean? To the American, what does the rest of the world mean? To the European, what does shortage mean? And unfortunately, that was a very horrible image of the African. So I just pasted something different because I didn't like how they depicted the African. But then to the African, the question currently and continuously continues to be, what does food mean? Unfortunately, but that's just for illustrative purposes of really getting you to understand the importance of context and I starting to appreciate this even as you begin to communicate your science. And we're going to talk a bit more about how that happens. And then just continuing a bit more with some of the other challenges that we've really seen in as far as communicating science. The scientists that we've engaged and been training in the past tell us, we've realized that they're really unable to simplify their research findings. The jargon, and like I mentioned, you send a scientist to engage a policymaker, and the policymakers are asking us, what are these people saying? We're just not understanding. So the challenges of simplifying the technical jargon for a non-technical audience, I think is a huge challenge. And then the mindset. And unfortunately, for a lot of scientists, or in a lot of institutions even, you find that communication is an afterthought. So when people are drafting their proposals, they want to really just focus on the technical side of things. And then communication is completely just put at the back burner. And then later on, of course, the donors also want to know what was the impact of this, beyond just publishing. And then people begin to realize, oh my God. And I think their appreciation is coming up. But for the longest time, communication has been considered, has been put in the back burner. And then the other thing we've also seen is the inappropriate stakeholder identification, using the wrong messaging for the wrong audiences and not using the ideal platforms. And this is ideally really just not thinking of communication, even as a scientific process, and thinking about how to make it systematic so that you're able to speak to the right people in the right manner. And again, we'll touch on this just a bit, and I'll go into how we're able to do that. What are the rules, or what are the key things? There's a lot you could do, but I really tried to synthesize and give you some key takeaways of what are the rules, or what should you be thinking about when you're trying to effectively communicate your science. And the first rule, basic, is effective communication must be planned, right? I remember I talked about one of the challenges being inappropriate stakeholder identification and using the wrong messaging and platforms. But even as you complete and you're finalizing your research and you're thinking of wanting to engage an audience with your outcomes, you need to ask yourself, what are you trying to achieve with this audience? What's your goal? And then ask yourself, right, so what kind of messages do I need to give? Who are the right people to speak to? At what time do I need to speak to them? And what tactics should I be using to engage them with? So we call them in communications the 5 W's and a H. The why, and then identifying who will help you achieve your why, identifying what you need to tell these people, when you need to tell them, where, and how you need to tell them, and the where, or the when, where, how are the tactics of how you do that to achieve your communication objective. And so how do we begin this? We say that ideally you should start with your why. I've already mentioned that, but begin by developing a SMART communication goal. And by SMART, what do I mean? And I think this is a very common term, probably with everybody in this meeting by now. You want it to be a specific goal. You want it to be measurable, because you want to be able to come back and see, have you made any change? You want it to be, of course, achievable. You want it to be relevant, and you want it to be time bound, so that, nobody has unlimited resources to keep running around in circles. So of course you want it to be time bound so that you can go back and measure and see if there's any change, if there's any impact. So you have your why, you have your very clear and SMART communication objectives. And then the next thing you want to do is to define your who. Who do you need to engage and work with to help you achieve your why, right? So for you to be able, of course, to define your who, you need to understand your stakeholders, and you need to understand their levels of influence. So if it's a policy that you want to inform, you need to ask yourself, who are the people that you need to engage, so that they use your evidence to inform that policy. Remember, and I like to say this to scientists and to people, decisions are made by people, not institutions. So when you're analyzing your stakeholders, you don't just want to stop at ministry or this regulatory body. You want to go down to the details of the individuals within those institutions that you need to engage, that are going to help you achieve your goals. So we spend a lot of time when we're working with scientists trying to get them to understand how they can define their stakeholders through different tools that we use. So we have the stakeholder analysis. We use what we call a net mapping tool that goes into the details of not just understanding the stakeholders and their names, but also understanding their networks and who they engage with, who influences them, what kind of relationships do they have, because getting people to act on your cause can be a lot more complicated than just printing a policy brief and hoping that a policymaker is going to pick that up and make a decision or act on your cause, right? So once we spend some time understanding the who, the people that are going to help us achieve our goal, we also spend a bit of more time trying to understand this stakeholder, right? What are their values? What's important to them? What are their priorities? What unites them? What incites them? Remember, decisions are made by people and not institutions. So you need to understand the people that you want to help you achieve your goal. Who influences them, or what influences their behavior? Because sometimes you may not be the ideal person to engage them, but they have people within their spheres of influence that they listen to. So you're better off, maybe even in terms of strategy, engaging those people to help you take your message forward. So we spend a bit of time trying to understand that, understand what their knowledge gaps are, and making sure that when we're engaging these people, we are speaking to either their needs, their concerns, their knowledge gaps, and how do they give and receive respect, and what can you do to make them feel respected? I'll give a story of when I once, in my previous life, worked at the African Population and Health Research Center. And the researchers had done this amazing study on education transition, and we wanted to get the attention of the then cabinet secretary who had just been appointed. But of course, him just being appointed means there were so many people wanting his attention. And so how do we get his attention, and how do we show that we respect this man? And so we sent a group of photographers to go back to his home where he started his primary school, because we knew he had a really difficult childhood growing up. And they took photos of his school, and we did a really beautiful frame of these photos and sent that to his office with a brief, a very short brief on the report and how he can help change education in this country. And the title of that frame was where it all started. And I can tell you that grabbed his attention. He felt, these people know me. These people have gone to some effort. And he reached out. He came. He launched our report. And from then on, one of our scientists was actually one of his go-to people that he would reach out to when he wanted information or evidence on education. And so you just have to be very creative sometimes in trying to get or to move your research from where it is to actually inform policy in a lot of cases. So you understood your stakeholders. So when you've done that, what that means is you understand their values, you understand their concerns, and what then you move or want to do then is to develop relevant messages. So you know that the person you want to influence is concerned about certain things or has needs for certain types of information. And so what then that enables you to do, it enables you to begin to develop messages that resonate, right? And even as we do that, we say we again look at the messages that you're developing and really again trying to break down that technical jargon. When you go out there and you're talking to people and you say zoonotic epidemiology, not everybody understands a lot of these things. So breaking all of that down when we're developing these messages and making sure that we've also simplified the technical jargon in that message development. So there's that what you want to say, and there's what they're interested in, and that's where you find that middle ground of relevance. And how do you do this, you might ask? There's this tool that we call the message map tool that is usually very helpful in terms of presenting these facts and trying to simplify this complicated issue. So this is a whole training that we take scientists through. Of course, we don't have the time to do that within the short period that we have together, but it is possible for you to take all this research that you have done and really just crystallize it into key, succinct messages that speak to your target audience. There's a formula to that. So once we have, we have our why, we have our who, we figured out what we want to tell them, then we begin to think about where, when and how we are going to communicate this information to them. And this is the tactics. But a lot of times you find in a lot of institutions or a lot of scientists just tend to start with the tactics, and then they spend a lot of money, a lot of effort, and they're still not able to influence the targets and ask, where are we going wrong? And where we've always gone wrong a lot of times, we realize is a lot of people are quick to say, oh, we have this research paper, so, and we want to influence this policymaker. What do we do? Oh, how about we do a policy brief? And we assume that that policy brief is going to be what moves the needle for us, but that's not always the case. So there's a lot of work that has to go through in the back to sort of just get you to where you now settle down on the ideal tactics that you can use to influence your policymaker in this case. So that's the first rule. The second rule is that you have to build trust and credibility. Really, 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 really important for scientists to understand that listening is your most effective communication tool. And this is actually research that was done by a risk communication expert called Robert Covello. And he said, when his research, he's realized that 50% of communication is, hinged on showing that you're listening to your audience, that you care about them, that there's some empathy, and you have about 9 to 30 seconds for an audience to decide whether they want to continue listening to you. Unfortunately, scientists tend to think that knowledge is what counts, but you need to appreciate and understand that knowledge does not equal to trust. And I'll keep saying this, I think, severally throughout this conversation, because we've even seen with COVID, the knowledgeable people were ignored. So knowledge is not equal to trust. It's about you and your approach. That's what helps to build trust. And why is that? Because people want to know that you care before they care about what you know. And the only way that they can know that you can show them that you care is by having responsive messages and messages that resonate and speaking to their issues and concerns before you start to throw your science on them. So very, very important for you to appreciate and know and know that. What are some of the pillars that we've seen are very useful in building trust? You being consistent when you're engaging. Of course, relationship building is very important. Reliability goes without saying. Being committed. Your competence, again, very important. Networking, sincerity. And I want to finish with the value system, because I feel this is what we really don't focus on a lot of time. Trying to find shared values and making sure that you're engaging people from those shared values and not challenging their value system, I think is very, very, very key to highlight at this point. And what's the third rule that we've seen is important is understanding the gap. So from your training as a scientist, you do your work, you want to have your technical theory, you want to collect your data, do your analysis, adjust your theory, and then finally come to your conclusion. So that's just from the nature of training, and that's how we do science. That's the scientific method. But then when you now begin to engage with the non-scientist audience, they want the bottom line. So what? They don't have time to want to hear all of these things. And even when you're engaging with the media, a lot of times, a lot of scientists come to me and say, Bibiana, I was given time to talk to this journalist. We spoke for about 15 minutes, but the guy only picked 3 seconds of my bite. Yes, because all he cares about is the bottom line, right? So we really need to get scientists to appreciate and start inverting this pyramid when they're engaging and talking to a non-technical audience. You begin with your bottom line, and then where you have an opportunity, you can now bring in the other information and the rest of your story. So again, very important to re-emphasize the so what. And the so what, starting with the most important information that speaks to people's concerns, that speaks to their whys, is very key, because then those relevant messages is what leads to trust and acceptance, which I said is very, very important in getting your audience to act. Right? So we want to be able to start moving outside of how we've always done it in the past, where we start talking about what we're doing, how we've done it, and then now finally coming to the bottom line. And we want to invert, to start with the inside and go out, because when you do that, you make your communication relevant to your audience. When you speak on people's concerns, it creates that empathy, you're seen to be connecting with. It creates that empathy. And when you start there, remember we talked about the 9 to 30 seconds to grab your audience's attention. So when you start from where they care or what matters to them, then they want to know more because you're speaking to their needs and you're speaking to their concerns, right? So how do we do that? How do we develop this responsive messages? And what are these responsive messages? So what we like to call them are also key messages, and what these are the main points of information from your work. So you've done a lot of things, and yes, it's very important, but depending on who you're speaking to, you need to be able to synthesize the main points of your work, so that the people that you're speaking to, remember, not being as technical as you are, they still need to be able to hear you, to understand you, and to remember you, right? So these are sound bites that articulate what you do, why you do it, how you're different, and what value, again, I'm highlighting the word value, what value that brings to your stakeholders. So these messages that resonate with your audience show that you care. We say people want to know that you care before they care about what you know. So you need to have messages that resonate and that show that you care, right? So if you walk in the paper, when you're looking, you pick a newspaper from a stand in the supermarket, you find that the headlines are very enticing, right? And ideally, we would like to see that with scientists when they're engaging with a non-technical audience. Of course, not for this kind of audience. When you're speaking with your peers, it's okay, for instance, to have a topic such as, and I was looking through who is speaking tomorrow, I saw one topic, evolutionary vector genomics, and that's a good topic for this kind of meeting. But if you're speaking to a policymaker and your headline for your presentation is evolutionary vector genomics, you have completely lost them, right? So you want to begin to start thinking about turning your headlines into succinct messages that can entice your reader or your listening. So because this is when they decide whether they're going to give you more of their time to continue either reading your opinion piece if it's an opinion that you've written, or whether they're going to continue listening to you if it's an interview. So ideally, your headlines are supposed to be catchy. It's supposed to be an idea, not what you put in your journal publication. It should be an idea. It should have a call to action. Either you're trying to protect something, you're trying to protest something, or you're trying to procrastinate a change in something. And some try to sell fear. I personally don't advocate for selling fear because I think fear has a way of, just disengaging people. But what for me is, I want for you to consider is to think of your headline as a signpost that directs your reader to the main story. So I see this, it grabs my attention, and I want to continue hearing or listening to what this person has to say. And so in our trainings, and again, this is usually, a lot of work that goes into this. Before we get to this stage, I talked a lot about trying to understand your stakeholder, and a lot of, analysis and net mapping that goes into that work. Once you've identified what your stakeholder's area of interest or concern is, then ideally what we say is, your stakeholder, what their area of interest or concern is. So you've listened. That shows that you've listened and you know some of this information. And then you begin to pick key messages from your research, ideally 3. 3 is a magic number in communication because people, for some reason, tend to remember it. That's the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So 3, magic number, try to crystallize and pick 3 key things that you want to share with this audience and try and keep it within 30 words, not too long. A quick headline, and support that headline with some facts. Sorry, I see some. Oh, sorry. I thought the audience was speaking to me. So you try and do that and support your messages with some facts. And I just to quickly go through, because I see I have 3 minutes. Again, when you're developing your messages, you want to make sure that they're accurate, that you use relevant and up-to-date information. And of course, transparency is key because this enhances trust. So it's important, given an opportunity, to acknowledge your study limitations. you know, as I finalize, you know, what are some of the things that you need to think about when you're sharing some of these messages? So you've done some groundwork, you've developed these messages, right? And they're responsive. But how do you share these messages? Because you remember, and I love this quote by Maya Angelou, that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you make them feel. And this is the reason, one of the key things why storytelling rather in science is becoming very, very important today. Why is that? Because we've seen that science appeals a lot to the rational brain, but our beliefs are motivated largely by emotion, right? And unfortunately, when you look at, well, not unfortunately, but scientific presentations by their very nature are very abstract and disconnected from people's lives. So what you tend to do as a scientist is, and this is your hypothesis as a scientist, so we've seen, right, that scientific information will increase technology acceptance, right? And this is largely informed by the deficit model. And what does this deficit model say? The deficit model, which is widely practiced by scientists, basically says that there's lack of understanding because there's lack of information. And so if we give and if we feed these people with scientific information, if we tell them what they need to know, then they're going to accept our messaging. But that's very, very, you know, we've seen that doesn't work. And the other assumption has been that the more educated a person is, the more he or she will understand your technical information. And again, we also know that that is not true. We saw even with COVID, the arguments, the back and forth of whether to wear masks, whether to vaccinate, even the most educated people were arguing with that. And then we assume education, therefore, will minimize or dispel risk aversion. And we've seen that that is not true. And then, you know, there's this phenomenon called cultural cognition in psychology. And what that is the tendency of an individual to conform their beliefs about a disputed matter of fact to values that define their cultural identity. Again, going back to that values, and that's why I kept emphasizing and highlighting the word value. So people always go back to their values and things that define their cultural identity, even on scientific issues. So giving them education and trying to educate them about this science and this research is not going to work. That's just not going to work. Why is it? Because when we try to produce, to provide this scientific evidence, what happens is this phenomenon, again, in psychology, they call cognitive dissonance, where the data that you give me that is against my values and views causes a natural mental reaction for me to want to resolve that issue. And the way I'm able to resolve that issue is by dismissing information that doesn't align with my values, and I go and seek information that reinforces what I believe in from trusted sources. And sometimes these trusted sources are not, you know, the best. And so what then do you, as a scientist, you need to work towards minimizing cognitive dissonance when you're engaging your audience by making sure that you're engaging their values. Again, back to that values. There's what your audience values and there's your values. And you need to find that elusive middle ground, because when you're able to get that, the shared values, and communicate from that point, then that is the point that is critical to persuasion. And so you need to start thinking, even as you draft your messages, even as you share your messages, that you're affirming rather than challenging your audience's values. And I think when you begin to do this is when you start to see people are likely to be open to your information and what you're sharing. So even as you continue to engage with non-technical audiences, or as you attempt to, if you've not already started doing that, you need to understand that, and I know this is difficult for scientists, you know, pay less attention to your scientific presentation. When you come to such a conference, when you're speaking to your peers, those scientific presentations are fine, they work. But if you're speaking to a non-technical audience, if they don't trust you, if they trust you rather, you don't need the science. If they don't trust you, your science will not help you. And I talked about trust earlier and the 9 to 30 seconds and how you need to show people that you care through making sure that your messages speak to them. So pay less attention to the scientific presentation when you're talking to your a non-technical audience, and try to think about how to find those shared values and do your messaging from that point. make your cases more memorable and believable. Stop intellectualizing everything. I know that's, again, very difficult for scientists, and that's fine within your audiences. But when you're engaging a non-scientific audience, again, remember, you don't have to intellectualize everything. Just really try to engage and get people to speak to people's concerns. Make your cases appealing, yes, to their heads, but very importantly, also to their hearts, because we tend to forget the hearts when we're engaging non-technical audiences. And this is, for me, the last slide. What do you need to do, or how do you do that? How do I make it less scientific? How do I become more memorable? And how do I tell this story? You know, you have your message, but how do I craft it in a story? You need to find the hero in your story. We say that, you know, science it's not about publishing. That's an academic exercise. You want to be able to find and humanize your research. So find the hero in your story, because what you're trying to solve is a problem. So that hero has a problem that requires a solution, and then tell us how you're taking this hero in your story, or how you've taken this hero in your story on a journey to a new reality. That's how you tell a story. And I think these are, you know, small parts of, very small parts of what we do when we're training scientists to engage non-technical audiences. We do offer this kind of trainings where we teach you how to do your messaging, how to engage the media, how to engage the policymaker, how to develop your elevator pitches, how to tell your stories. I think I've run out of time, so I just want to thank you all so much for your indulgence. We have an e-newsletter called the Drumbeat that gives trends on biosciences across Africa, so feel free to visit our website and subscribe to that. And if you want to get in touch with me afterwards and continue this conversation, my details are there, biraki@isaaaa.org. You can find me on Twitter @bibsiraki. Thank you so much, Caleb. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Bibiana. That was really wonderful. I think getting to understand that, know that you care before they care what you know. And as a biotechnologist, I have a background in biotechnology, I really get to appreciate the work that ICE Africa are doing in creating awareness. And I think we scientists focus more on the proposal for research, but they forget about creating a plan for communication, creating a plan for managing their data and so forth. So really, this is quite informative, and I think it would help our audience to just get to understand and see the need for that as we move forward. So unfortunately, we'll move straight to the next presentation. If you have any questions, please do share on the chat. I can see there's no question here currently. Do share on the chat, and then Bibiana will be able to respond to them. And if you have additional time, you can just engage as we go along. That was really fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all. I'll leave my email in the chat just in case anyone can get it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. We have Yo. She's already in the room, so she shares a screen. We'll get to introduce her, then she'll be on her way. Welcome, Yo. You can share your screen. So Yo, she's the executive director of the Open Life Sciences, and she will be talking to us about the alternative careers within open science. Welcome, Yo.
Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be given the chance to talk here today. So just as a warning, if you're looking at my camera, occasionally if I look this way, I'm looking at a screen beside my camera and not actually talking and ignoring everyone. So yeah, my name is Yo, and today I'm going to be talking about alternative career paths within open science. So on the bottom left, if you use Twitter and you'd like to tweet about this, is my Twitter handle, that's @Yo Yehudi. These slides are Creative Commons licensed, so if anyone wants to reuse them or reuse some of it for some reason, then you can do. And there's also my email address on the bottom right corner of this, so that if you want to contact me for any reason. So how do I get my next slide to? There we go. Excellent. Also down at the very bottom, I have a link, bit.ly/boss2022 careers. If you want to view these slides directly, you can follow along yourself. And that will be on every slide. So don't worry when I move on to the next slide, it'll still be on the bottom right corner of these slides. So one thing that I've noted, and I'm reusing this very much from another careers talk that I saw on Monday. So as Caleb mentioned, I am Executive Director of Open Life Science, and just very coincidentally, we ran a careers call on Monday, and one of our speakers, Melissa Mendonça, she started with a credit slide saying, these are the people who have helped me get where I am and made me where I go, and pointed out that really, really often, when we're doing career talks, we have a picture of ourselves and all of the amazing things we've done, but actually there's no way we've achieved that on their own. And I thought that was such a beautiful message that I'm like, yep, yoink, I'm grabbing that and I'm going to do the exact same trick. So I'm going to start out with some of the credits for the people who've really, really helped me get where I am. And so first of all, I've highlighted this in big bright yellow. So Berenice, Emmy and Malvika, I am lucky to have to collaborate and work with my best friends actually on my day job. And the Open Life Science, it's a community that is designed to help people who are in a research area actually learn to build community and to share their work openly. And there's about 370 of us in the community. I am amazed to say that. It's one of the most delightful things that keeps me going every day. But a few other shout outs are my supervisors. So I'm a doctoral student. I hopefully will finalize my thesis this year. Should be doing it right now. Don't tell anyone. But I wanted to shout them out. All of my friends and supporters who've taught me things in the various many open communities and open source and others as well. And also my PI from my previous job. I don't work with him anymore, but he gave me so much chance to grow and still supports me even though I've left that job. And so I'll talk also a little bit about what I've done in the past, because I didn't really approach academia through a traditional approach at all. I did it very backwards. So I'm not officially working in academia anymore, and I still haven't quite graduated my doctorate. So my first few jobs, I worked at a call center. It was really, really boring. Lots of trying to sell people websites they didn't need, customer service for people who hadn't paid their phone bills, things like that. So it wasn't the best job, but it paid the bills, which was the main thing for me. I've worked as an administrator at a hospital in a social services department. I will be happy if I never have to hear the sound of a fax machine again, because I did a lot of faxing. And then after that, for about 5 years, I worked in tech support. So this was back on the phones with a lot of, have you switched it on and off again? Or can you go and unplug and replug that cable, please? And so that actually spans a period of 5 or 6 years when I had moved to the UK, which is where I'm based at the moment, but I'm an immigrant. And my visa didn't permit me to not work. So if I didn't show that I had a source of funding, then I would have actually been kicked out of the country. And the reason I mentioned that is that meant that I couldn't go to university as a very young person full time, because I wouldn't have had an income stream. It wouldn't have complied with my visa terms. So my degree took 9 years, my undergraduate degree. And by the time I'd actually finished my undergraduate degree, I worked in a research group at a university. But technically, I suppose, when I started working at that research group, I didn't even have any degrees at all. So I've done my best to do everything in the wrong direction as far as I can tell. And then now this is some of my more recent stuff. So I did still have a slide, with me, and here's all the stuff I've done and my picture and so on. But I thought, make sure that we credit some of the people who helped me get there first. So this works backwards in time. So like I've mentioned, right now, my day job is at Open Life Science, and I'm also a student. But if we look previously, I've done a lot of different software development related jobs, some of which are in academia and some are not. So I worked for about 1.5 years at the Wellcome Trust, which is a research funder. You can see below that, 2015, for 5 years, I was a software engineer, open source research software engineer at the University of Cambridge. And then you can see actually that things change around quite a lot if you're working further downwards. So you can see 2014, 2013, 2011, I was changing jobs quite a lot. And now in a lot of talks, I actually wouldn't put a lot of these jobs because there's this, people sort of say, if you're only in the job for a very short time, maybe you're not going to stick around and things like that. But I thought in a careers talk, it would be nice to highlight that actually sometimes, no matter how hard you're trying, you don't find something that sticks, that's quite right for you for some reason. But when you do, then sometimes you stick around longer. So I've got, changing every year or two at the bottom, but then at Cambridge, I was comfortable, mostly I was happy, and I stayed for 5 years. So the common themes around these largely for me are that software engineering was something that I loved, and through software engineering I accidentally ended up in academia. So the second to last job at the bottom there, project lead and developer at KNow, that was actually an academic spin-out company. So I joined as a software engineer because I needed a job to write code to pay my bills. And I actually found out these people with PhDs were like normal people. I think I had in my head that people who had done postgraduate education must have been utterly, overwhelmingly smart. And I found out actually they're people. Like, oh, maybe I can do this. And so then I sort of tried to orient my career more towards research and academia because of that. So it wasn't a natural evolution for me. It was a surprise. And definitely if I went and talked to Yo of 2012, I don't think I would have any idea. I wouldn't have known what open science is, which is really funny, given that that's now everything I do. So sometimes your careers can take you in unexpected but joyful paths. Okay, right. So I wanted to talk a bit about job titles as well. So these are 3 specific job titles. These are all things that I've done, but I've never had any of these job titles specifically. And so this was just me sort of thinking about, like, with a talk title like alternative career paths. I'm trying to look at some of the things that I've done that aren't necessarily considered within the academic domain sometimes. So the one on the right, yellow, the researcher postdoc PI, that's kind of the, I'll put this in quotes, standard one. But the 2 on the left, community manager and the research software engineer or data scientist, so they're perhaps a bit less standardized, at least not yet. And while none of them have been my job title, they're definitely things I've done in various different ways, various different amounts over the last few years. So when I was working at Cambridge for 5 years, my job title was software engineer. I didn't have science or research in the job title. And when I started, I was largely writing code. And by the end, it sort of, I drifted from the blue into the pink over time. So I think someone said to me, "Yo, you've got Twitter, right?" And that's how my descent started. Someone's like, "You know how to use Twitter, you should help us with this." And by the end, what I was doing, rather than writing code on a day-to-day basis, I was often attending conferences, teaching people how to use our software, doing things like managing when people wanted to contribute code to our code base, running our internship program. So we had people interning through Google Summer of Code and through Outreachy, both of which are 3-month paid internship opportunities. And so basically I sort of served as a human glue between people who wrote code all the time professionally for research and people who wanted to be involved with what we were doing. And so community manager was also very much never in my job title, but was absolutely something that I was doing. Whereas the yellow, the researcher, has largely been something that I did outside of my paid job role, whilst I was doing my MD with the University of Manchester, which, as I mentioned, could be writing towards my thesis right now. Am not. Always, as a grad student, very easy to find reasons to not do it. So I thought maybe I'll say, this job does that bit and this job does this thing. And after thinking about it some more, I'm like, there's different ratios of each of these particular things, but they can all happen in each of these jobs. So when I would say, as a research software engineer, for example, I was more likely to be writing code than any of the other things, but I did do all of these. I probably could have avoided teaching or interacting with the community if I'd really wanted to, but I was lucky enough to have enough flexibility that I could interact with the community. Whereas a community manager for an open research software project like what I was working on may be less likely to write code, although again they may do so, because it sort of just depends what time and interests you have and what the role can allow you. But I guess my point is that whilst it can mix and change, there are opportunities to do all of these within all of these job roles and paths. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to say about this slide. I don't think there was. Cool, let's move next. And I wanted to also talk about some real life stories. So I think I mentioned earlier, so Open Life Science, one of the things that we do as part of our training cohorts is that we run a careers call once per cohort. So we now have 5 hour-and-a-half long calls where we've had people from various walks of research in and out of academia talking about their careers. So I've put a link if you want to actually look at some of these. Most of the talks are about non-traditional careers. So there are a few people who've been PIs in a more traditional way, but we tend to have, let's say, 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 ratio for these. So if we have 3 or 4 talkers in a session, then only one of them tends to have a very traditional career and the others have approached it. And I think one of the calls we had, people said my career was very wiggly, which I think describes it very nicely. So if you go to bit.ly OLS careers, or if you're following along on the slides at the bottom, you can actually click on this link. Then there's a YouTube playlist with 4 of the calls. The 5th one will be added probably next week because we only recorded it on Monday. But I just wanted to talk about some of the other careers that people have shared with me as well. So these are just a few of the people who have given some talks in Open Life Science. I'm just going to highlight some of them really briefly and mention perhaps why they're interesting, and then talk a little bit about some of the things that were common around all of these talks. So the first person I just wanted to mention very briefly is Rachel Ainsworth. She's based in the UK at the Software Sustainability Institute. And she's an astrophysicist with a PhD by training, but these days she's the community manager for the Software Sustainability Institute. And she actually does a lot of work around managing events. The Software Sustainability Institute has a fellowship program. She manages the yearly intakes of fellows as well. So it's a very logical, natural career progression when she sort of talks through it, but it's perhaps not their traditional career as well. She does still work at the University of Manchester. Another person, Natasha Wood, she gave a talk. If you click on the names, they're linked as well. But she gave a talk where she's based in South Africa, and whilst she did start her career in academia and sort of hopped in and out for a while, eventually she worked in industry at a startup. So this was a company that does HIV related research, but it was spun out of a university. And she actually raises some really nice points in her talk where she says, you know, it doesn't really matter whether or not your career is necessarily in academia, so long as you are looking at the goals, and if those goals are the same as what you wanted, and you're enjoying and you're learning in this curiosity, then you're still accomplishing what you need to be doing. The third person here, Ekin Bolukbashi, she is Turkish. She's also based in the UK. I actually met her when I worked at the Wellcome Trust, which is a philanthropic research funder based in the UK. And so she these days, working as a research funder, she has a background as a scientist who researched fruit fly aging, or rather aging in fruit flies. But because she has this experience in research, she has a much better understanding when she looks at funding requests, knowing what pressures researchers and scientists have in the grant cycles and in academia and so on. And then finally, if you only listen to one talk and you want just to be gently soothed and happy with your career, click on David's talk. So he's a scientist, a data scientist. He's also a farmer based in Ghana. And I think a social entrepreneur is a good way of putting this. He uses his science skills to actually look at things that can affect farming and farmers in a positive way. And it is just one of the most chill, laid back, sensible advice talks you will ever hear, listen, watch to, sorry. And then one final talk here that I just wanted to highlight. Again, I've got links to it. This is a talk from Jason Williams. He is an assistant director at the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory in New York. And I've gone back and watched this talk 3 or 4 times. But I highlighted a little quote at the very bottom where Jason says, create the opportunities you're looking for. Take the opportunities that are presented to you and work to understand people. And in this talk, he unpacks it a bit more. And he says that sometimes life doesn't present you with the opportunities that you may want to have. And so sometimes you have to figure out how to craft it yourself without waiting for someone else to make that a job and then wait for it to come and see you. But figure out how you can work it into your plans. And then take the opportunities that are presented to you. That someone else, if they're giving you a hand up, then, you know, that may be the way to help you getting you to creating the opportunity you want. And since help doesn't come all the time, taking those opportunities may be the way to get further forwards and work to understand people. And actually that last bit, working to understand people, is one of the most common themes when I've gone back and I've looked at these alternative career path talks. Everyone says, you know, I learned to do science, or I learned to do code, or I learned to do whatever it was. But ultimately, it always came down to the people. And it was the people that was the most important part of my career. And I think it's a really important and common theme just to think about, like, no matter what you're doing, if the people that you're working with, if you're having trouble communicating or understanding or getting on with them, it's not going to be what you need. And actually also, even just thinking back to the previous speaker, there was so much emphasis on communication. And I don't think anyone warned you when you're in school. They're like, got to learn this and you've got to learn that and you've got to learn this. But actually everything in careers, it's everything comes down to people. I'm going to talk myself hoarse if I keep talking, so I'm going to stop sharing, and I don't know if there's time for questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Yo, for that lovely, more or less, your journey to where you are currently. I think what comes out really clearly is that you can create your own journey, and you can create your own career, as you also concluded. It's, if you just understand, as you gain skills, as you gain exposures, as you network, as you stay within the cutting edge of your field, you can always find a place for your interests and your inclinations, something that you can do that you enjoy getting to do. So if you have questions for you can add them on the chat, or just raise your hand and I'll give you an opportunity to ask your questions. We have a few more minutes for questions. So I think what I'm curious, many people find themselves, and I think if you're in Kenya, you know that sometimes the degree choice the choice of degree that you take is always based on what the placement institute decides to give you, although you get to choose a few, but most of the time some of us may not get what you want. What are some of the practical advice you could give, especially for someone maybe they are interested in maybe science communication, they're interested in community, they find that they are really good in working with people, and yet they get into science, they are stuck in the lab, and they realize that they are not working with people, and they feel stuck in there. How would you advise them?
That's a really, really interesting question. I think some of the most interesting people are the people who've hopped around and who haven't had the obvious careers. And that a lot of the things that you're learning, just about no matter what that degree, is going to be something that's transferable. So I would think, you know, rather than I learned a wet lab technique or a particular computing technique, whilst you were doing that, you may have collaborated with someone on a team, or you may have coordinated some talks, or you may have written a paper or something like that. And those things, they don't rely on what degree you may have been doing. And there's something that you can take to any other job, and that will ultimately be more valuable. And actually, when I've hired on recruiting panels, almost every time it has come down more to the transferable skills a person has than to the technical skills, because I can teach someone how to, you know, do code, for example. Most of my hiring's been around code, so that's why I'm providing that example. But if they don't know a specific language or a specific technical library or something like that, that I can teach them. But if they are perhaps, if they haven't really got any experience with the communication, that's something I can't teach them. So I wouldn't worry about the degree topic. I mean, there is some level of do need to worry here. So I don't think, for example, that I, as someone who's a computer scientist who's worked in biology, I don't think that I would have skills to go and work in history, for example. But I think that the people skills that I have learned along the way, whether that's computer science or anything else, those people skills can be applied in many different domains. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. And I think you are present when you talk about sometimes it's not in your job title, but it's what you do. So some of the things that you do, you can actually span any of those out as a fully fledged career. So that is well answered. And thank you so much for that. Any other questions from the audience? How was the transition from academia to now an executive director? How was that transition for you?
Oh my God. So a lot of small organizations have a fiscal sponsor where someone manages things like accounting and legal and so on. We really wanted flexibility in our organization to do some of the things we needed to do. So we decided, even though it was going to be a challenge, to take that on ourselves. So much learning. Open Life Science, my organization, it has a pension plan. I did not know what employees needed to know about pension plans. We have insurance. So there was a bunch of stuff where we jumped in feet first, and we learned just like by finding out we should have done that last week very often. But it's a journey that I would, if you are interested in the challenge, I would recommend it, because it's interesting and exciting to see what the new kinds of pressures are like when you don't have an admin office to support you, which you might at a university, for example. But yeah, it's not to be underestimated. There's a lot to learn very fast.
Thank you. I think you're doing a fantastic job, and we just want to appreciate what you guys are doing. There's a hand from James. We'll take that as a last question as we transition to the next talk. James?
Yeah, so my question, I think for people transitioning to, let's say, the industry, there's always a question that, you've worked in academia and probably you don't have project management skills. And I always, say, I mean, we are constantly running, we are constantly running projects, right? How, and my argument is that, I mean, that's project management. So if you think about even your own PhD, that's a project in its own right. You saw it through the conception, you're managing it to the end, you're closing it, it might involve actually even managing the finances and etc. So is this something that is usually accepted as some experience of project management in the industry, or it's just in our heads for people who are in academia?
I think if you answer the way that you just answered now, that you would probably convince people. I mean, ultimately, a PhD is literally carrying out a piece of research over several years, relatively unsupervised. A master's is similar, although perhaps over a shorter time. And to be honest, so Open Life Science, we're in the middle of shortlisting, interviewing right now. And very often when we were reviewing for project management criteria, if someone had a PhD, I would automatically say, yes, they have project management experience. However, this may be because of the fact that I know this hands-on. But I think just if you describe the fact that actually a PhD, or even if you've not done a PhD, if you've done any type of research project, just explain that, when you apply for funding, you usually have to have Gantt charts, and you have to have a clear plan for how you're going to work on this and accomplish the money. I think the only time people really are going to be asking that question is because they don't know what happens in a PhD, and they think that there's absolutely no hands-on application in the real world. But if you talk through what you've done even a little bit, I think it becomes pretty obvious that actually you've got to be really organized if you want to spend a lot of years researching and creating new knowledge for humanity.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for a fantastic presentation and really great responses to the questions. So the next talk, actually, Anne, I think you are with us. You may start sharing your screen as I get to introduce you. And thank you really for joining us. So Anne, is a PhD candidate in crop science. She's an award-winning science communicator, STEM advocate, host, and founder of the Root of Science podcast. She has a passion for science and exposing the many wonderful careers and opportunities that are available in the STEM field. As a result, started the Root of the Science podcast in March 2020, March 2020. The podcast is currently in its third season of production, airing every Monday. And as a flair with connecting with guests to create educating and engaging content. Our dream is to create premier platform for Africans in STEM to be specialist science communication consultant. So thank you so much, Anne. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Caleb. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all. Yeah, thank you for that wonderful introduction. First things first, so my talk is on what's all the fuss about communicating your science, right? So we had such a great presentation earlier about science communication. So in my presentation, I'm just going to hone it a little bit closer to home, giving in more of my take and a personal story. So in communicating science, I think we all know that it's done to solve a societal problem. Sorry, I'm getting distracted with this. Let me just minimize myself. Yeah, so science is done to solve a societal issue or problem. So then how do we communicate our findings, to society? So on today's talk, one of the things that I'm going to be speaking about is what is science communication? Why on earth do we do it in the first place? Then I'll go on to what are the ways we communicate the science. Then I'm going to talk to you about how I personally communicate my science. And then lastly, I'm going to give us sort of a starting point for you and some key takeaways before we actually, of the whole entire talk. So before we get started, I think it's always good for me rather, to give you a brief overview of who Anne is. So the center picture here, I think it's like an essence of who I am, always smiling, ready to go out and about, but also at the same time, I'm a PhD candidate in crop science. Over here, this was me in the field as part of my research, and I'm also a science communicator. So my story into becoming a science communicator, or SciCommer in short, is that I'll be frank, I never actually wanted to be a scientist. It's because when I was growing up, when I thought scientist, I thought a white old man in a lab coat. I actually wanted to be a lawyer because I used to watch shows that had these lawyers who were confident, there were these women who spoke well, who articulated themselves well. So this will go into visibility, that I didn't have visible role models. And I'll talk more about this in the later of my presentation. So fast forward, I graduated with my master's in 2020. And I had a lot of time on my hands, and I was working on a pigeon pea. So this is pigeon pea, it's a type of legume that we're working on various different varieties, and we're trying to introduce them to small scale farmers in South Africa, where I'm currently studying at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And we wanted to see if they can use these varieties and commercialize them. So my supervisor at the time was telling me, like, Anne, we have to publish this work. And I was like, okay, great. And then what? What happens to this research that I'm going to publish, that I've been working for like 2 years? It's not going to reach the people who I've been working with in the ground, because my farmers are not going to go and read a journal article. So there was always the and then what for me. So in the time of me sitting and submitting my PhD, I started to think of ways to speak with my other colleagues who are actually also doing research to talk about how do we translate the science that we're all spending so much time on. At first, I tried to do writing, but I was like, no, that's a bit too tedious. I don't want to do that. I tried to do some blogging. No, not blogging, vlogging to create some videos. I thought the editing was just a bit too much work for me, so I left that. Then I thought, you know what, Anne, you're great at talking, you're good with people. Let's just interview somebody. And that's where the inception of the Root of the Science podcast started. And also the journey of me being the science communicator, speaker, etc. So I'm going to speak in greater detail about the Root of the Science podcast, but I just wanted to give you an overview of how it all started. As Caleb said in my introduction, that I aspire to create a premier platform for Africans in STEM, and my goal is to be a science communication specialist working with organizations and institutions to effectively communicate their research or their projects for the future. So before we get started, I have a quick Menti quiz that I'd like everybody to participate. You can do it on your computer if you go to menti.com and put in this code. I'm just going to share that slide. If you just hang with me for a second. 2 seconds. Okay, just going to stop sharing. Okay. So this. Sorry, technical difficulties. But I hope there's a question asking, my net, it's just loading. There's a question asking how well do you understand science communication? So just bear with me as I present it to you. How do you understand science communication? So I'd just like to get some feedback from you all. It's going to present on your side. So the first response would be yes. I understand what science communication is, or well, yes, I have some sort of idea, or no clue, I have no idea what science communication is about. So the Menti, you can go to www.menti and use this code. I'm going to try and put it in the link. You can use the link that I've shared. Okay. I'm just going to give it some quick, about 2 minutes or so, just to gauge some of your responses. Thank you so much for those who are participating. So far, it looks like there's okay, no clue is starting to pick up. All right, this is interesting. Okay. All right, so far we're going on like a yes, sort of, you have some sort of understanding of what science communication is. The people who have no clue what this is are also starting to grow, which is really, really good. Because then that means maybe my talk can help. Okay, so I'm gonna leave it there for now because we're starting to gauge a bit of an idea where most people are sort of like in the middle of what science communication is. I'll just go back to my slide. Okay. Go back. All right, so in the Menti quiz, there was a nice balance of people who were unsure, who knew exactly what science communication is, and those who had no idea. But the brief majority of you were sitting in the fence of like, yes, sort of, I kind of know what this is. So then this allows us to start from the beginning. What exactly is science communication? When I started learning about science communication and getting my feet wet in what SciComm is, and reading various, journal articles or threads or whatever's, there's a lot of, I want to say, a bit of a debate on the definition of it. I mean, there's many ways that people can define what science communication is. The one that I loved and the one that I think transcends for me personally is that science communication is a channel of dialogue between the scientific community and the public, right? So we have a scientist here, a pretty little scientist. We're going to assume that's me. When we think of science communication, I think this was also said in an earlier talk, where most scientists know how to communicate to other scientists. And we know how to do that really well, going through the peer review process, submitting papers. Of course, that in its own has got its own ups and downs, most of us know, but that's the most common way that scientists know how to communicate the science. And I say this because before 2020, that's the only way that I knew how to communicate my science. I didn't know that there are other people involved. So be it government officials. So government officials are obviously essential for informing policy and for decision making. Scientists need to communicate their research, so that important decisions can be made by government officials, which then later translated to the general public. Scientists also need to learn to communicate their science to the media, and they need to be able to communicate this in a manner that is, that tells a story, that grabs attention, that is without all of the technical aspect, so that the general audience can understand this research. Sorry. Okay, so why do we go through all of the fuss? Why communicate the science? So as I said earlier, we want to inform policy. So in this science, in this conference, one of the themes is One Health, and people have been speaking about antibiotic resistance. So of course, this is not my area of expertise, but I remember I had a guest. His name was Ramos Okulu. He's currently doing a PhD at Stellenbosch University here in South Africa, and he came on to speak about antibiotic resistance. He was working to look at the flow of how the antibiotic resistance starts from from animals all the way to humans. So the whole essence of his research was that his results would inform policy to regulate the use of antibiotic resistance, particularly antibiotics in agriculture. And I'm sure many of you who are working in this line of work or other parts of your careers, you can also relate to that. Also, it's for public acceptance. We need to communicate the science because we all do many things. Back to the themes of this particular conference, we're speaking about genomics, and some of those things are plant genomics, human and animal genomics, and there's a lot of stuff going around GMOs. So we need to be able to communicate our science to curb fake news and misinformation. We saw all of the importance of that, particularly during the COVID pandemic. For example, with the COVID vaccines, where there was an important need for scientists to communicate the science so that people can accept the vaccine intake. Secondly, we also want to improve the public perception of science. When the public think of science, it's one of those things where it's a very far off removed field, if I'm an artist, or for example, I have no need to know about science. That's for people who are smart. It's not for us. But we want to create that idea that science is not only for smart people. People can understand it. We don't live in what we call an ivory tower. Another important thing about science communication that I love is that it showcases the diversity of science, rather. So most people, when they think of science, they think, an engineer, a doctor, or somebody who works in the lab. But there are so many other careers in science communication. You can work with self-driving cars, or you can go work with insects or alligators. There's so many things, and I think that's what science communication does. It showcases the diversity of science. Another important thing for science communication is for entertainment purposes. When I think of for example, if we think of Netflix, I have an 11-year-old sister. She is obsessed with this show called Emily's Wonderland. So it's a scientist who does all these really cool experiments with kids, and it really engages kids to actually look at science as something fun and something they can aspire to be. There's also a great show of documentaries such as Explained that really talks about some important scientific issues, as well as National Geographic. When I was younger, they used to show these beautiful documentaries of the space or animals, and that is in essence science communication for entertainment purposes. Another important aspect, of course, is to capture the interest of funders. We all want to do research, but we all know research requires money, right? But the people who have the money are not always scientists. So we need to be able to communicate why the research that we want to do is worth their coins. So we can't go in there and, for example, if you're wanting money from the government to a policymaker and you speak all these big technical jargons and he doesn't get it. But for you, it might make sense, but for him, it's like, why, or her rather, why must I give you that money? So we need to be able to communicate effectively so we can capture the interests of people to fund our research. And I mean, most importantly and most obvious is to report research findings. What is your lab currently doing? What are you currently doing? That's why we do science communication. But what usually happens, and I love this image, is that, scientists speak amongst themselves and they speak the languages of apples. And then with the public is understanding oranges. So there's that disconnect, and people, there needs to be a bridge for us to communicate effectively. Sorry, moved ahead. So how can we, minimize that bridge, and how we can do that is different ways to communicate our science. Before I talk about the different ways, I'll just like to emphasize that when you're communicating a science, you need to have a good story. Most people listen to a story. They do not get bored if your science is in a manner that relates to them. And I think this goes to trust that was also mentioned in the previous presentation about science communication, that if you can get your audience to trust you, they will listen to you. But if you can't get them to trust you, then the science won't save you. I love that quote, and I'm going to use it for the days to come. Another thing is that you can't make science, you must be able to communicate your science, but do not dumb it down. Sometimes as scientists, we might undermine people, saying that, no, they won't understand. But that's not what you're meant to do. You're meant to be able to communicate, to communicate your science in an effective manner where the facts are still facts, but it's a lay person can understand. So traditionally, science has been communicated in many ways. So science journals, like I said, or science magazines, we've seen that. You can go to museums and see wonderful exhibitions, or planetarium, where we see wonderful exhibitions about space, or aquariums about all things that are going on in the ocean. I used to love as a kid going to the museum to look at all of these things, and it was just mind-blowing for me. And that is a form of science communication. I didn't know it at that time, but that is a form of science communication. Another way that science is communicated is through science shows. So again, I remember when I was younger, I think in primary school or high school, we used to have scientists from the local university come in, and there was this guy who used to do these really cool experiments with, bicarbonate soda and Coke, and create that volcano that like explodes, and we all lose our minds. So that's a form of science communication, and I'm sure some of you have been to these shows or festivals. Another one is conferences like this one, or even those in person, is a great way that you can communicate your science. Another way is through radio. Radio shows now, I saw during the pandemic, they were really getting into allowing scientists to speak about COVID. Your immunologist, your virologist were getting onto radio and TV shows to speak about science. Of course, we live in a digital age now. Everything is in the palm of your hand. Everything is done quick and fast. So there are digital ways of communicating your science. And then one way of doing this is through blogs. Some people might argue that this is a traditional way. Sure, I will not fight you. We can say that blogs could be traditional, but I just thought I put it under digital because it is digital. Other ways that people are communicating their science is through YouTube, creating wonderful videos, animations, which is also a form of what they call sci art, where you do great things to engage audiences, because some audiences are very visual and they like to see and watch things. We've seen a rise in TikTok, Instagram Reels, where things are explained to us, just in 2 minutes, in fun, cool ways by reliable scientists who are actually doing the science, which I love. And another way, as you can see, big and bold, is podcasting, which for obvious reasons, it's a favorite here because I am a podcaster, and I'm going to speak more about that just now. But first, we're going to go back to the Mentimeter. And I'll just like to I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll just like to get your take in terms of, can everybody see this? I hope. Your take on the next question. Oh, you can see this one, the Mentimeter question, hey?
Yes, we can.
Oh, thank you, Caleb. The next question that I have is, which ways has science been communicated to you? So you'll see, if you go onto your Mentimeter quiz, you can put in, be it podcasting, be it museums, be it newspapers, be it, I'll just like to gauge an idea from you as an audience in which ways you've seen science being communicated to you. If you can just entertain me for the next couple of minutes. Oh, nice. Webinars, conferences, classrooms, yes. Journals. Okay. Twitter, yes. Posters, press brief, nice. Some of the key big ones are YouTube conferences and webinars that are coming on. Museums. Okay, just gonna let others join. Still the same link that's shared in the Zoom web chat if you want to join us. Podcast, yay, somebody has listened to podcasts. Podcasting, yes. Public outreach, publications, YouTube. What else is there? Cartoons, nice, nice. TikTok, I love that. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna stop there and just let it go as I go back, but I think in terms of the general consensus with most people, it's been through conferences, it's been through YouTube, it's been through journals, and it's been through Twitter. So those are some of the key areas, and the others are of smaller responses. I'm going to go back to my presentation. So I was really happy to see that some of you put podcasting, because that's what the next topic is. It's about how I communicate my science, and that is with the best science podcast in the world, the Root of the Science podcast with your girl Anne with an E. That is my tagline, that is my catchline. If you want to listen, I'm going to put the details at the end, but you can find us on Spotify, LinkedIn, Google Podcasts, wherever else you listen to your podcast. Now, the purpose of my podcast was that I wanted to create a platform to amplify the voices of Africans in STEM. I mean, you know, it's one thing writing, but there's just a beauty in hearing somebody speak passionately about their research or their projects, because most of us, you know, we have a thing that we nerd about it, and it's primarily our it's our research. So I want to create that platform to amplify those voices of Africans globally. And also, I mean, at the same time, while I'm amplifying the voices, I want to show the human side. So that's why it's called the Root of the Science. We talk about your research and your projects, which is great, but I also want to talk to you on the human element. So it's a beautiful synergy of sharing stories. At the same time of sharing those stories, it's visibility. You're going to hear that this is very important for me, where I want to showcase that, you know, you can be an African from Kenya, for example, and you are in Russia pursuing a degree in astrophysics, or you can be from Malawi and you are at Cambridge University. You are not limited to your circumstances. Furthermore, with the visibility, it's very key, because it's hard to aspire to be something that you've never seen. So that was also a reason why, for me, I never saw people who sounded like me. So I couldn't really dream of being a scientist. So with my podcast and the way that I communicate my science, that's what I want to do, which then goes back to the vision. I want to create a premier platform for Africans in STEM. So when an African if you're an African in STEM, wherever you are, and you want to talk about your science, you think the Root of the Science podcast. You know, I have this vision where the podcast is so much bigger than me as Anne, but it's about touching lives, it's about inspiring people. So I would love to see it on like international platforms. So we're thinking BBC, we're thinking Al Jazeera, heck, even Netflix, you know, where people could consume this content at their own time, at their own leisure, because as we can see with the way that media is moving to, we are going to more Netflix sort of consumption instead of watching TV in real time. The way that I communicate my science and how it's helped me is that it's helped me develop soft skills. So soft skills, for example, in just speaking, presentations. It's taught me to not really be afraid of speaking in front of people. It's given me opportunities to moderate, to host conferences, and to MC. So it's really helped me with my own confidence. Further, it's also helped with networks. It's helped me create friendships and just professional work networks that have helped accelerate my own career, be it academically or professionally. It's gotten me into spaces like this one where I'm presenting in front of you today. Most importantly, the way that I communicate my science has broadened my thinking of what science is, or what a scientist can do, in terms of that science is no longer linear. Our last speaker was just speaking about this wiggle career trajectory, where you don't only have to go in the straight and narrow journey. You can be a founder, you can be a CEO, you can do a lot of things. And I've seen that with all of the guests who I've interviewed. I've interviewed about over 100 people all over the globe who are brilliant, brilliant African scientists doing amazing things. So I'm sure you're like, okay, Anne, we hear you. You've done all of these amazing things. SciComm is great, but how? How do I do it? Where do I start? And I'm a very practical person. I love practical things, you know, because it's all well and good saying you should do this, but I think it's really important onto the strategies or the resources for you to communicate your science. So again, networking. So Twitter for me personally has been instrumental, has been key to the way that I communicate my science. So I would recommend follow the hashtag SciComm and follow the people who come up there, the things that are being done there, follow those people, engage with those people. Another important tool, of course, is LinkedIn. Follow people who you admire, people who you look up to, and engage in those types of conversations. That could be a really great starting space. Another thing is volunteering. Volunteer in organizations. I volunteered in an organization called Visibility STEM Africa, which was really, really key. It helped me gain also my network. So volunteer with organizations in ways that you can help them communicate their science, be it writing blogs, press releases, whatever. Just be very creative about it. Same thing with schools, maybe in your local community or universities, about ways that they can communicate their science. Another one, which is almost similar to the Twitter thing, is that reach out to pros in the field. The people who you look up to, join mailing lists. There's one, I follow some UK-based ones called PSciComm and also SciComm News, which has been really great for science communication opportunities. I've created a list which I can share, and maybe it can be disseminated to everybody after this, so that you can follow and you can kind of see what are the type of positions available in science communication, what are some of the resources, where are some of the virtual conferences happening, etc., etc. Another way of doing science communication, of course, is getting formalized training. In Africa, and I stand to be corrected, the two institutions that I've seen where you can get a degree in science communication is the University of Stellenbosch and Rhodes University in South Africa. Those offer postgraduate degrees, and it's a great place for you to start if you want to venture into a degree, formal training. Also, Lifeology offers some really great courses. MIT also has got an open courseware for science communication and storytelling. Also, Udemy has got great resources for you to look through. Again, there's some links which I can share and I can curate. I've seen, in Europe, in the US, and the UK, they offer really great opportunities to study science communication in various institutions, and some of these institutions also offer some virtual courses which you can look into, which are really great during the pandemic, but now they're kind of moving back to in-person, which is a little bit difficult, but there's still ways for you to get there. Trying to hurry so that I can get to my last slides. Okay, so as I almost conclude, some of the takeaways that I want to leave you all with is that, science is no longer linear. There's a beautiful way that your science journey can take you. For example, for me, I never formally trained as a science communicator or did a communications degree, but it's with my science that I got into this field. Secondly, there's this, I love this term of new age scientist. We can have a lot of wiggle room in our careers. We can be an astrophysicist or be a community manager, like was explained to us by our previous speaker. There's so many things that we can do. We don't only have to get your degree, do a postdoc, become a lecturer, then become a professor. Not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but you can be multi-dimensional, which I absolutely love. Most importantly, network. don't be afraid to send people messages. Send me a message. Send whoever you look up to. I call myself the DM queen. I will DM anybody who I can or email just to get some sort of help, because in most cases that I've seen is that most people don't flat out say no. They rather say not now, or they refer you, or they say yes, not now, or refer you to somebody else. And also just how science communication has got such a foundational skill for your own everyday science. And I think it's really, really, really important. As I finish my conversation today, I'd like to dedicate this to Ndoni Nkunu, who was a friend of mine, a big sister, and also a personal mentor who sadly passed away on the 16th of April. She was a climate change activist and also the CEO and founder of Black Women in Science. She played such a pivotal part in my career and was such a firm believer of creating spaces for African scientists and also science communication, and also climate activism. One of my favorite quotes that she said was that we need to learn to communicate our science better so that science careers can be more marketable. Doni, rest in peace, and your legacy lives on and will always be multiplied. Thank you very much, everybody. You can contact me on Twitter or LinkedIn, or send me an email, or follow my website. It's coming out next week, so just be patient if you're following the website. But yes, that is it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And it's really interesting to hear about the alternative options for communicating science. And I think shout out also to Sarah in Nigeria as well. She's doing science communication via podcasting and doing something that some of us, as you get to learn about that, you also get to explore other opportunities for communicating your research and also exploring it even as an alternative career. So, and I think this aspect of a danger of a single story, that what you guys are doing, especially in sharing the stories of different scientists, people get to hear that there are different pathways to arriving at that. That's really recommendable. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
We are supposed to be on a break now. If you have questions, you can share on the chat or via the HackMD, and would be able to respond to them. So thank you so much, everyone, for really sticking with us and for the great presentation, all the other speakers. There's a link to Biana's presentation that has already been shared. And if you would be willing to share also a link to yours, that would really be great. Thank you. So we'll go for a short break, then come for the next session. Just want to connect to the next speaker since having trouble joining in. Thank you all. Let's take a short break, then we'll start the next one.